had no problem renting a car and driving my family home because I didn't feel like those people on the plane should be exposed to chickenpox on my part. I felt like I was infringing on their personal rights by doing so. So this bill, to me, goes a step too far that it imposes someone's freedom of rights on their private property or private business, and it imposes your rights over there. So that for that purpose, I will be a no.
For debate on the motion. Good lady for 32.
To debate the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Good lady has the floor.
So this morning we had the great opportunity of hearing this bill that did get vetoed. And it was interesting as I questioned the good gentleman from Legislative District 8 and asked him, what does shall not mean? And he says, that means they can't. I would bring your attention to the bill on page 2, lines 28 through about 32 there. It says, a business shall not refuse to provide service, products, admission to a venue, transportation, because a person has not received or used a medical intervention. The medical intervention doesn't say just an injection, just a vaccination. It specifically says you don't have to have drugs, you don't have to have diagnosis, you don't have to be treated, any of those kind of things. So then put yourself in this situation. You're an employer, you have an employee that maybe gets hurt on the job. Say it steps on a rusty nail and he gets tetanus. He has a right under this bill, even though you're the employer and you will be held responsible and it's your liability insurance that will get to pay out on this, that employee has every right to say, I'm exercising my medical freedom, therefore you can't push me to get a tetanus shot, which might be a simple intervention to a small problem that then becomes a massive problem. And if you've ever been an employer that's had to pay out on a massive injury or on a death benefit, this becomes a huge problem for Main Street businesses across this state. I have no problem having people have medical freedom, but this isn't medical freedom, this is medical terrorism. It's terrorism by those that don't want to have any kind of medical intervention against everybody else in the state. Everybody else that has a private business that says, you know what, I don't care what you do on your private business, I don't care if you get drugs, I don't care. But as soon as they come, and it comes to a private business that has private property rights, that's a private employer, not a public employer, a private employer, you're now saying that your rights are superior to anyone else's right. When questioned earlier this morning about is there anything in this bill that makes it so somebody has personal responsibility along with their rights, the answer was no. So the question becomes is, although I understand and I appreciate that people do not want to be vaccinated, I can appreciate that. But when you have situations where somebody could be contagious and cause other people to get sick, and maybe it's in someone's private business, the person that will have the liability of that will not be the person that's exercising their medical freedom. It's the businesses and the private property owners that own those properties. For that, I would request your red light.
For the bill in motion, good lady from 6.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the good gentleman a question.
May yield to a question.
I yield.
Thank you, good gentleman, and Mr. Speaker. So on page 3, line 7, when you're talking about schools, operating in the state shall not mandate a medical intervention for any person to attend school, enter campus or school buildings, or be employed by the school, provided, however, nothing in this section shall supersede the authority of a school district or board of trustees of a school district is provided for in Chapter 5, blah, blah, blah. So my question is, looking back, on a college campus, we had issues where kids are attending college, and they became very sick. And the college had kind of quarantine areas for these students. Now, when it says that they shall not mandate any medical intervention, how do you see that they can control an outbreak of whether it's meningitis, whether it's, we had the COVID issue, but So tell me, how does that work on a college campus where these individuals are very close together and they're trying to keep as many people safe as possible?
Gentleman from 8.
Mr. Speaker, a good lady, I mean, again, they just can't force a medical, treatment or intervention. They can't force them to take a shot or a particular medicine. They can ask them to leave. They could ask them to do all kinds of other things other than actually force them to take a medication. There's all kinds of ways they can do it. They could ask the student to go home. That's exactly what this title under this law, this Chapter 5, Title 33, Idaho Code says. I don't understand the confusion here. You just can't force them to take a medication. If you can ask them to vacate the property, you ask them to go home, you ask them to go take a nap, there's all kinds of things they could do, but you can't force them to take a medication against their will.
A follow-up.
Good lady from 6. Good gentleman from 8. Yield to additional question from the lady from 6.
I'll yield.
Gentleman
Thank
yields.
you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, good gentleman. My next concern is with a private business, and if I want to take the temperature of individuals who enter my place of business, if there's an outbreak of whatever, and I just take a temperature to see if they have a temperature, would you classify that as a medical intervention?
Gentleman from 8.
Mr. Speaker, good lady, I mean, there's a definition of the medical interventions in here. And I believe that is included here. Medical intervention means a procedure, treatment, device, injection, blah, 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 to prevent, cure, diagnose. I mean, again, just we get back to a basic philosophy here of we need to ask people and have a dialogue and conversation. We're not going to force people to do things against their will. We're just going to ask them to. And if they don't want to take their temperature, you could ask them to leave.
Lady from 6.
Thank you, good gentleman. To debate the bill, Mr. Speaker.
He has the floor.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I never had the vaccination because I felt I did not want the vaccination. And so my husband and I both, and most in our family, chose not to be vaccinated. But I have a real concern about this going too far in our private industries. And I'd like to give you an example of one of the very largest employers in District 6, Clearwater Paper. They have thousands of employees across the country. And on a given day, I'm going to say on a Monday when they show up for work, they were asked they had to have their temperature taken. So it was a requirement. They scanned their head to see if they had a temperature. If they had a temperature, then they said, now here's a free COVID test. You have to take this to determine whether or not you may be carrying the virus. As many of us know, if you took a test with the COVID, you might test positive and you felt absolutely fine. And you may not come down with it, but you were called a spreader, whether you agree with that or not. But so with the thousands of employees, this employer took it upon themselves to just say, are you sick? You may not know it, but we have all these people and we have got to keep our each shift going because we cannot stop because they produced toilet paper, and we know toilet paper became a huge issue during this COVID area. It cost this company millions of dollars, but what they did is that they decided they would rather pay the money than to punish their employees. They didn't want to fire any employees if they didn't force them to take any shots. They didn't force them to have anything go into their body. But under this bill, it does not give them any authority to take the temperature to try to mitigate any future problems. So I asked the question, could we add some language to give some protection to our employers, not to say they can force the shot. I agree with you on that issue. But I think that with the language as is written, guys, this does not give those protections, and that company could not have enforced what they were trying to do which was a good thing. They did what I believe was the right thing for employees or employers, I guess, for both. They did not fire anyone for not taking a shot. So because of that, I have to be a red light, and I would encourage you to put your red light on, because this bill needs to be fixed so that our employers can do just that, and they can protect the people that are working for them and keep their doors open. Thank you.
For the debate on the motion, good gentleman 14.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Debate in favor of the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
So you've heard quite a few different kind of potential scenarios. You've heard about good Samaritan businessmen trying to do the right thing. Doesn't stop that businessman or any other business from doing the right thing in general. But what it does put it is the even playing field. The individual is the person you're trying to protect. That is who we're always trying to protect. That is who the law, the Constitution, everybody is protecting, is our individual rights, not a business. If a business wants to have somebody, then great. If the person's actually sick, they can excuse themselves without a problem. To come in and say, we're going to come in and test you if you've got a fever, to put them through like a cattle line. So we're going to take your temperature, and then we're going to shove something up your nose, and we're going to test it. That is, again, not right. We saw what happened under COVID. It went way too far. Businesses took things to extreme levels, like the vaccinations. I'm glad the good lady was advised correctly, or at least had the good sense not to take the vaccine, same as myself, but maybe some people in here thought it was necessary and they did. That is your individual rights. But when we talk about what the issue was, that the governor had the issue on this bill, it dealt with schools themselves. And if you go to Title III, Chapter 5, I believe it's 512, Section 7, it actually states that he can actually, that the school does have the authority to deal with things when there's infectious disease going on, contagious type aspects. They can actually shut down schools. It is already in our law currently. So this bill just is the same bill that we had before. It just puts that portion of that statute into this, that it cannot supersede this, and it points out the exact issue that the governor actually had an issue with, which I could see potentially where he could see that issue, but luckily our current law addresses that. So this is a good bill. It does give that individual medical freedom rights, those decisions to the individuals, and I'd ask for your green light. Thank you.
For debate on the motion, good lady 17.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good gentleman from District 8 yield to a question?
Gentleman 8 yields a question. Gentleman says no. For debate on the motion, good lady from 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm guessing the gentleman will not yield to any more questions, but something that's very unclear
Would
to
you like to debate the bill, good lady?
Thank you, if I can debate the bill.
Good lady has the floor.
So something that's super unclear to me in this bill, and I just went out and reread it in some piece, and I keep rereading it and rereading it and rereading it, and I failed to do this the first time, but I read it the first time, but didn't reread it multiple times. I cannot figure out for the life of me who is liable, if you will, if somebody contracts, let's call it tuberculosis, and we can't require them to get tested because that is an injection, or we can't require them to wear a mask, but yet then they go and they take care of more patients, and they're now spreading it throughout this building, if you will. I can't figure out for the life of me then who is liable. And so that is a huge red flag to me. And that's something I keep coming back to as I read this. If we can't force that for safety reasons, I think it's so much more than COVID. I'm so sick of hearing about COVID. It's not about COVID. There is a lot more to this than COVID. This goes way back before COVID. It goes back to Florence Nightingale, who learned that if we wash hands, we don't spread disease. So anyway, maybe he can address that in his closing, but I do have some concerns.
For debate on the motion, good lady 17.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate the bill.
Lady has the floor.
Since the good gentleman from 8 is done taking questions, I did just want to address a few things with this bill as it's currently written. My youngest son is still of the daycare age, and so when we're talking about having reasonable conversations with customers, I'm imagining asking 2-year-olds if we can take their temperature before we do so. I also am frequently getting notifications from his daycare of the latest outbreak, which is never ending and never things like COVID, but instead it's things like pink eye. And they will frequently post notices that if your child has pink eye, then they need to be on antibiotic eye drops for at least 24 hours before returning to school or to the child care facility. As I read this bill, there is no exception for daycares, even though they're very similar to schools. And for that reason, I would ask that we all give it a red light.
For debate on the motion. Hearing none, would the gentleman from, good gentleman 23.
Mr. Speaker, to the debate the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
I ask unanimous consent to read from my notes.
Unanimous consent has been requested for the gentleman to read from his notes. Is there objection? Hearing none, you can read. Oh, gentlemen, just a second. There's an objection from gentleman 15.
Mr. Speaker,
Yes.
if this is going to be granted, I would like it to be granted to everyone else, quite frankly. So I'll object unless there's a unanimous consent that in the future anyone can read from their notes.
Been an objection to gentleman 23.
Go on, or do I need to withdraw it?
No, you can't read it. He has been an objection, but you can debate the bill.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Would
Speaker.
you like to debate the bill?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman has the floor.
So I know a lot of folks have asked about liability, and I think that if a customer shows up and they refuse to leave, then that could be a violation of
Gentlemen,
Idaho.
you can't read it.
Then that could be a violation of Idaho Code 18008. They could also file under criminal liability for harm if they come knowingly sick and still don't leave. They could also be a public health violation if they knowingly spread sickness around. So there are violations that people can make them leave. They have private property rights that they can leave. I think we should just focus on what happened. There were businesses who went way too far. Not only did they ask you to take medical interventions one time, they asked you to take it a second time. And I think this is a good opportunity for people not to have that option. And I would think business owners wouldn't want that liability anyway. Why would you want to force any type of medical intervention on someone anyway? You ask them to leave if they're sick. So I'm going to give it my green light. I would ask you to do the same.
For the debate on the motion, good gentleman 16.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to debate the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, friends, I'd ask you just to really look at the definitions here in this bill, which is where my concerns come from. So on page 2, line 9, this definition of medical intervention: diagnose, prevent, or cure. Includes just about everything under the sun, to be honest. So take that definition of medical prevention and then jump down to page 3, line 26, and then look at the entities: state government, county government, local government, and a business entity. So we're taking this incredibly broad definition of medical intervention and we're applying that to just about any entity that employs people. And then now jump to page 2, line 33. A business entity shall not require a medical intervention. What are we setting up here? You can't do anything. I've run large organizations. I want healthy employees. I've encouraged people to stop smoking, encouraged folks to lose weight, to reduce their blood pressure. You can't do these things with this bill in place. This is completely upside down from what we should be doing. What are we going to do? We're going to wait for the employee to have a heart attack and then cover the cost there, which brings us back to a previous budget conversation we had in this building. It's overly broad, it's dangerous, and it restricts what a business can do. And I go back to the gentleman from 14's example. Listen, if there's somebody that does not want to play ball with the company and there's 500 employees, guess what? They can opt out. that's now a 499-person company. That's what should be happening here. They have the liberty to opt out and go do their own thing, follow their own medical procedures. But to say that a 500-person company cannot respond and they risk putting the other employees, their health at risk, that's completely unacceptable. And these are not far-fetched corner scenarios. This is in the plain reading of the bill. This is a dangerous bill, this is a dangerous precedent, and this is way out of control. I recommend your red light.
For debate on the motion, gentleman 7.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to debate the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, as per usual, things are kind of getting drawn way off track of what the bill's actual intent is. As a business owner, I can put policies in place. I can have a policy that says, you know, before you come work for me, you're going to sign this employee handbook that requires you to go get a COVID vaccine. If that policy is in place and you sign on to it, you've just given them the permission to do that. This policy states that if they are an employee, you can't now force them to do any of these things. It's no different than a daycare. Daycares have policies. You sign that policy. If your kid shows up with the flu, they can turn your kid away. This doesn't change that. They can still turn your kid away. They just can't force you to go get the antibiotics for your pink eye. If it takes 2 weeks for your kid to heal from pink eye, then your kid's going to be home for 2 weeks because that's the decision you're making. But it's giving the decision to the parent and the person that has to deal with these interventions. It's no different than me having a business running a night shift in a less than safe area of the neighborhood. I can't force my employees to carry a gun. They have a right to say, no, I don't want to carry a gun. This is no different. You just can't tell people that they have to go do something. You can send them home. You can say, well, if you're not going to work here, tough luck. I got a policy that says you got to carry a gun. Bye. If you show up sick and you got tuberculosis, it's pretty obvious when you got tuberculosis, you can say, go home. You're going to get everybody sick, go home. It doesn't stop you from sending people home. That's a whole separate section of law. It has nothing to do with this bill. This bill simply states that you cannot mandate a medical intervention. That's it. If you want to talk about employment law, that's a whole other section of statute. It has nothing to do with this bill. This is an easy, simple bill. We all want freedom in this country. That's what we're here for. Give it your green light.
For debate on the motion, gentleman 27.
Just a couple observations. I'd like to debate the bills.
Gentleman has the floor.
So I have often had sections of time where I self-funded my medical plan for my employees. And when you do that, you assume all the risk. But you get a lot better price of your catastrophic insurance that you buy if there's a few things that you have. And some of those are not necessarily vaccine, but weight loss and smoking are the biggest ones. And I'm not sure that I'm comfortable to put myself in a position that I can't do anything, encourage any kind of intervention, even if it helps them become healthy. I can't make any of those judgments. But yet, the insurance that I buy when I'm not self-funding dictates to me where the risk is. So I see this putting employers in an awkward spot, just like the lady from 6 talked about the sawmill. You know, it's not what happened during COVID. I can't imagine would ever happen again for at least 50 years because everyone would have to die that lived through it to go through that again. But I think we've swung too far in our effort to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So I would encourage a little bit of, what's a good word? A little bit of common sense in this issue. So I would be definitely a red light. Thank you.
Hey, gentlemen, for debate on the motion, the gentleman from 30.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To briefly debate the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
I will be quick. First off, I don't care what your intentions are. A law is a law, and it's written right here on page 2, line 29. A business entity doing business in the state of Idaho shall not refuse to provide any service, product, admission to a venue, or transportation to a person because that person has or has not received or used a medical intervention. Again, a business entity shall not refuse to provide any service or product. So we can talk about intent all day long, but when the lawsuits come and that business has to answer to that, it's right there. What about religious schools? Do they not have a right to their religion? What if they chose through policy of their church or their religion that everybody in their employment needed to do something related to a medical intervention, one that we haven't even been made aware of yet, that hasn't even come about yet, but now their rights are being infringed upon? I've searched the Constitution. I can find specific parts where it talks about private property rights. I can't find anything that talks about medical intervention or medical rights. This bill goes too far. It's poorly written. There's all kinds of stuff in here that just doesn't belong. And I can't stand by and just let us talk about intent when it's written in black and white.
For the debate on the motion, Gentleman 13.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to debate the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the reasons why I'm even here is because of what happened during COVID. And what happened during COVID to me is I worked for a company that told me on 2 separate occasions that I had to be fully vaccinated by a certain date. And I was a stay-at-home worker. So part of the problem with that is that during that time, you remember under the previous administration, that administration used OSHA as a club to get people to be vaccinated. And companies that had employees, a number of employees, I think it was more than 200 or more, had to follow OSHA's leading. And there's another dimension to it. Not only what happened then is, and could happen if we don't adopt this bill, is that not only were my civil rights violated, supported by the Constitution and also by a Nuremberg Protocol, but the company had no way to resist the power of the federal government under those rulings until they were debated in court and finally overturned. So something like this actually does protect companies from having to follow an abusive mandate. So I urge a green light on this.
For the debate on the motion, Gentleman 11.
To debate for the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has the floor.
I'll keep this very brief. The same talking points that I tried to bring up and impress upon folks during the debate for the bill that got vetoed was pretty simple. We live in a country where many of our professions are regulated by licensing, by certification. And my question is, how many business owners in the state of Idaho have somebody on staff who's certified to make decisions about medical issues within their company? I'm going to hazard a guess that probably the vast majority don't. So leaving that up to the business owner who is not a medical professional, who's not medically certified, to look at one of their employees and say, hey, Joe, I want you to go pick a medical intervention, right? That would be no different than somebody, let's just pick somebody from hiring a medical professional to come in and start tearing into their circuit breaker box in their home or in their business and expect them to do a satisfactory job of replacing the circuit panel. Okay, this is completely out of their wheelhouse. They know nothing about electrical work. They're not certified to be an electrician. They're not licensed to be an electrician. So why is it that any other business owner, whether it's Costco or McDonald's or any other business, should be able to have the jurisdiction to be able to look at an employee, to be able to look at a patron that's coming into their place of business and say, hey, I want you, patron, Mr. Patron, to go get a vaccination because I think you might be sick and I don't want you coming into my business if you're sick. Or to look at another patron that comes in and say, hey, I think this guy might be half blind. I wanted to send him out to get an eye exam and potentially, if he needs to get a pair of glasses, to get glasses on before I let him come into my place of business because his eyesight might be bad. I don't know that, but it might be bad. So I'm going to take reasonable precautions and require him to go do something to get his eyes checked and to get glasses before he comes back into my business, because what if he trips and falls because his eyesight's are bad? Now I'm on the hook for the liability. I think we just need to stop and go back to the days of everything before COVID. People get sick, people die, that's a part of life. There is, I think, the vast majority of people understand that when they're sick, when they're contagious with something, most people stay home. But this should not be a choice that's left up to unlicensed or uncertified people who are not medical professionals trying to dictate to the rest of the world what kind of medical interventions that they're required to have. I absolutely support this bill, and I would appreciate if we got green lights on this. Thank you.
For the debate on the motion, can gentleman two?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate briefly.
Gentleman has the floor for a brief debate.
Good body. I'm sitting here and I'm trying to figure out how such great confusion has arisen out of the difference between somebody showing up at your business ill and you telling them to leave and you dictating to them how they treat the sickness after they leave. And the good gentleman from 30 who read the portion of the law that is very clear, I agree, it's very clear that you can't demand anybody get a certain treatment to enter your place. It doesn't demand that you have to let them in if they're sick. We're talking about two different things here, and I'm just astounded at the confusion. The first time we went around with this, we were worried about lice, kids in school with lice. Well, we've cured that. Now we're worried about tetanus. 1.5 Americans get tetanus a year. Oh no. We're telling people, and I do agree with the good gentleman from 11, that who are not medical professionals, don't dictate to people how they would be treated medically. If they come to your business and they're ill, don't let them in. Don't tell them how to treat their illness. This is so clear. Thank you.
For the debate on the motion, here, gentleman 25.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Debate.
Has the floor.
I think one thing that this body keeps on forgetting is that with freedom, there's always going to be some sort of responsibility. When it comes to us and our own health care, we should take the responsibility to understand that it's like if we are sick, we should not be going out. We should not be going to businesses. If parents see that their children are sick, they should be keeping their children home and not sending them out to businesses. The reality is it's the individual who has rights. When it comes to businesses, businesses have privileges. And with that, I think this is a great piece of legislation. I think this is one thing we can do for the citizens of this great state is to go and provide that ability for them to go and be free again and be able to participate in society. And so with that, this bill has my full support. Thank you.
Debate on the motion, gentleman 24. You're good.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to debate in favor of the bill.
Has the floor.
This is a great bill. It breezed through the House last time. We're grasping at straws with scenarios and situations that do not exist. It breezed through because we know the heart of the issue. The gentleman back here, the good gentleman from 13, left a tyrannical state like myself and many others, where we were chased out of stores because we didn't have a mask properly tight around our nose. We came off of 4 years of dealing with certain countries that had vaccine passports. You were forced to get a vaccine to keep your job. Multiple vaccines. You were fired if you didn't. We had a good gentleman up here that dealt with an injury from a vaccine. All now we're finding out was pseudoscience. What we're saying is we do not want that here in Idaho. We don't want that here in Idaho. This is a good bill. It breezed through the first time. It should breeze through again, and we should not be having this debate again. Thank you for bringing this back. And
to debate the bill, sir.
Gentleman has the floor.
So, and I appreciate everything that's been said. It's almost not able to, I'm not almost able to say something that hasn't been said, but what I would like to draw your attention to is some anecdotal information that's come out. It is a good thing to tell your neighbor or your employee or your customer that they should stop smoking. It's a fully different thing to tell them in order to come into your store, they've got to get a nicotine patch. That's what this bill does. It prevents businesses and schools from requiring a medical intervention. And the part that the good representative from 30 read from pointed out was actually already in law. It just changed the word from COVID vaccination to medical intervention. This is a good bill. It's about freedom. It's about bodily autonomy. And I think that's what we're all about, at least in the Republican Party we're supposed to be. Mr. Speaker, I think this bill needs a green light. I almost said red and blew it.
We've had a little of that happen today. For debate on the motion, Gentleman 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple of things from listening to the debate. You may have something in your policy, but this bill says you can't have some things in your policy, so that's irrelevant. I think I wish we'd forget about COVID just for a moment, because that's a once-in-a-century experience that this country and the world went through. And writing laws and bills that relate to that go beyond COVID and effect, as the good lady from 15 said, there's more to it than just that. And yeah, I think mistakes were made in how things should be handled, but that doesn't mean that we throw all rights out the window for those people who want health freedom, the people who are near the people who come in contact with the people who insist on their personal medical freedom. So do you have a loved one in assisted living who might be immune compromised? Okay. Well, that employer can't insist on any kind of a treatment, including masks. Does that customer or patient have the right to say to that caregiver, don't come in my room unless you put a mask on because I'm immune compromised? What about that person's rights? Okay, so this says that person has no rights, because that employee can say, I'm sorry, my employer can't force me to put a mask on. Okay, so you're not my employer. There are a balance of rights here that people have. And the reason why that employee may not show symptoms or signs of being sick, but that doesn't mean they're not contagious. That's why you need to allow private businesses, especially those that are providing services to those who are immune compromised or vulnerable in other ways, to have the freedom to also make sure that their customers, their patients, are being protected. This bill removes all of those protections for the person, your loved one, your constituent who's in assisted living or in some kind of long-term care or even in a hospital. And so this bill really does not strike the right balance between the rights of an individual who wants medical freedom and someone who'd like to make sure their health freedom is also honored and respected. Thank you.
For debate on the motion, would the gentleman from 8 care to close the debate?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and everybody for the debate here. Just a few things. Like has been said, but maybe I'll just reiterate a few things here. I just think it's just plain wrong to force someone to take a medication against their will. It's just something we thought we agreed to a long time ago, and we lost our way during the COVID thing. I will never forget what happened to COVID. I think most of us won't. I've got a constituent who was paralyzed from the waist down because he was coerced into taking a shot against his will. Employers can encourage people to do things. They can make recommendations. They can ask, all that kind of thing. They just can't force it on people. The Constitution is not a limited amount of rights. We have rights that are not necessarily listed in the Constitution. And then, the last thing is just every medication, every treatment has side effects. Whether you're talking about like over-the-counter kind of stuff, like Tylenol or Advil or a vaccination or anything, there's pros and cons, and nobody else should be forcing on it. That should be an individual decision. That's the kind of stuff, I moved to Idaho 4. I think it's the kind of stuff people believe in here, and I encourage a green light on this vote.
Debate's closed. Question is, House Bill 472 pass the House. Clerk will mark the machine. Members will cast their votes. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Clerk will lock the machine and report the pairs.
Mormon votes aye. Church votes nay. 12 votes aye. Green votes nay.
46 ayes, 21 nays, 3 absent and excused. Board majority having voted in favor of House Bill 472. House Bill 472 is passed. House. Correction.